Hello, good evening, Kamrimo. Welcome to Tribal Futures 2.0, a month-long online festival celebrating contemporary tribal imagination and voices hosted by Tribal Design Forum. The Tribal Design Forum is a community of tribal professionals, students, and changemakers working to nurture and showcase the extraordinary creativity, knowledge, and cultural intelligence rooted in Indian tribal communities. TDF is open to all tribal professionals and students regardless of sector. It recognizes that designing tribal futures requires a multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary approach, meaning it is not just a space for designers or creative professionals, but a welcoming platform for every profession and specialization that wishes to discuss, contribute, and help design the future of tribal communities in India. We aim to harness our own unique ways of working, our limited collaborative resources to build pathways that honor tribal epistemology's authorship and dignity. I'm Ripandi Lepcha from Tribal Design Forum. The format of today's session is an introduction to Professor Esther SYIEM, and then it will be followed by ma'am's few moments of sharing. After that, we will have a question and answer session, and then we'll have closing remarks. Please keep yourselves muted during the session, but feel free to write your observations and questions in the chat. Professor Esther SYIEM is a distinguished bilingual writer and retired professor of English at Northeastern Hill University in Shillong, Meghalaya. With over 2 decades of dedication to studying Khasi folk literature, ma'am has made significant contributions to the field. Here are some key highlights of her work and achievements. Her poetry collections include Oral Scriptings, explores the follies and frailties of wit and wisdom. Of Follies and Frailties of Wit and Wisdom, another notable poetry collection. Many Sides of Many Stories, a poetry collection published in 2017. Her plays include Kanam, a Khashi play based on the folktale Kanam and the Tiger, showcasing her ability to reimagine the traditional stories for contemporary audiences. Her critical work includes The Oral Discourse in Khasi Folk Narrative, a seminal work that provides valuable insights into Khasi folk culture and narrative traditions. Her short fiction include Memoir in Water Speaks, The War Umkra, a book that lets the river Umkra speak about the soul of all flowing, living rivers and the interconnectedness with human experiences. Her translations and editing include Khasi Folk Tales. She has translated Khasi Folk Tales with Talika publications, including The Race of the Rivers, making these stories accessible to a broader audience, People's Linguistic Survey of India. As a member of the National Editorial Collective, she co-edited volumes of the languages of Meghalaya, contributing to the documentation and preservation of linguistic diversity in India. Academic and professional affiliations are as follows. Northeastern Hill University, she taught English at NEHU, shaping the literary sensibilities of numerous students. Shillong Forum for English Studies. As a founder member, she has played a role in promoting English studies and literary discussions in the region. Welcome, ma'am, to Tribal Design Forum.
Thank you, Ripandi. I don't recognize myself anymore with that introduction, but thank you anyway.
So, ma'am, if you'd like to share a few words, like before we go into the question and answer session. So.
All right, okay. I would like to thank the Tribal Design Forum for actually considering me to talk to all of you at this time. And it's a pleasure to see so many young people around, concerned about your own identity, concerned about what contributions we can all make as tribals who have struggled, tribals who have also struggled with their identities in very different ways. And I'm grateful to have this opportunity to share with you whatever experiences I have. Where I am an academic, I've taught English for a number of years in the Department of English, Northeastern Hill University. I also write my poems. I've also written a play in Khasi. I have another one which is yet to be published. I've got my essays and my book of critical writing. But first and foremost, I think I would like to look at myself as someone who is very concerned with someone who is interested, someone who is constantly reading myself in terms of my association with my own environment, my association with people around me, my association with who I am. This is something that I'm constantly trying to look at. And this is something that comes through the kind of oral background that I come from, the kind of oral tradition that I was raised up on. But most importantly, I was raised up on stories. And it is these stories that have actually excuse me, it is these stories that have actually been my lifeline. And I have internalized these stories to such an extent that, I couldn't help but talk about them. And in the long run, I realized that I would have to speak about them. Now, these are the stories that came from my great grandmother, from my grandmother, from my mother, my sisters, my friends. And so I could never escape the stories. I could never escape these stories when I was a little child and I was being bathed by this person who looked after me in the mornings. And I kept on crying and asking her for stories. Little did I know that these are the stories that are going to shape my worldview and the way I look at the world around me. So, by way of introduction, I think I look more upon myself as someone who reads the past, someone who's trying to understand what the past means for me and what the past entails for for future generations, for young people like you.
Okay, thank you so much, ma'am. Since I would like to, I had questions prepared, but I'd like to begin with this question. Like
All
as
right.
you said, ma'am, you would like to look back to the past, or you'd like to remember or recollect the past, so that you can, share or help the future generation understand what the present and the past means. So, can you elaborate a little on that, please?
It's important for a generation like mine. Now, I always consider to be myself to be very young. But when confronted with certain issues, I realize that, I've reached a point in my life where I have to stand up for the things that are important for me. So it's important that we have this kind of looking forward and this kind of looking backward. Because if the older generation were able to stand and sort of reach out a hand to young people in the past and reach out a hand to older people, I think a bridge will develop. And this is a bridge that can carry on from one person to another person to another person. And as I said, when I first started, when I first gave you my introduction, stories, stories, the oral stories that came to me, these are the what should I say? These are the means by which we could connect with each other. Now, let me give you an example. For instance, I have this play on Kannam, and I have this poem on Kannam. Now, Kannam is a very interesting icon in Khasi community, and when I say this, I'm thinking of another book which has been written by Namita Gokhale. I think you must have heard about her. She's the one the person who organizes the Mountain Echoes Festival in Bhutan. She has written a book called In Search of Sita. Now, for a person like us, for people like us, for a person like me, Sita doesn't really have any connection with me. But Kannam, this woman who actually traded off her daughter to the tiger whilst the daughter was still in the womb, and how we trace the life of the daughter Kanam, this is more important to me. And as I read Kanam, I'm also thinking of all the young people who are like this young girl who has been auctioned off by her mother, who goes up to the sun, she climbs up to the heavens, and in the folk tale, in the story, the sun discovers who she is and marries her off to her own son. But in the poem that I write and in the play that I write, Kanam refuses marriage. And as she climbs up the heavens, she calls upon the rubber trees. It's a very beautiful chant. She says, Sun Kukong A, Pat Kukong Ri, Sun Kukong A, Pat Kukong Ri. There are two rubber trees. She says, when she says Sun Kukong A, she's asking this tree to climb up. She climbs onto the tree like a step, and then she calls to the other tree to come down, and she goes down to the other tree, and that's how both of them, that's how both the trees go up. And when she reaches the heavens, in order to escape the tiger who was after her, she goes to the sun. But as I said in my play, she refuses marriage, because marriage cannot be the end. Marriage cannot be the answer to all the names that we have amongst our communities. So, Sita stands at one end of the spectrum, and well, at one end of not a spectrum, Sita stands at one point of a different kind of worldview, and Kanam stands at another point of a different worldview. And at this point, if I could just say a bit more, I go back to the Mizo community. I don't know if there's anyone here from Mizos, but this story, I hope I've got it right. I can see Renee here. Uh, I hope I've got this right, but I've always been fascinated by this story. This is about the first poet amongst the Mizos, P. Mwaki. Mloaki or Mwaki, I'm sorry if I've mispronounced her name, but she was so good at creating songs that she was actually buried alive by the king, who was afraid that there would not be any more songs to be created. But 7 days, till 7 days after she was buried, her gong could still be heard. Now, this is the strength that we must draw from our folks, from our stories. This is what the oral tells us, that we have to continue, we have to keep talking and communicating.
That's such a nice, those are such nice stories and such good, I mean, like to hear all of these stories is, I mean, like really, really, exciting for each and every one of us. I mean, the audience agrees with me. So, ma'am, like since you were a professor, and did you take all of these stories to your classes, and how was the reaction of the students if they listened to these kind of stories? I mean, the folklores and the folk tales and the oral stories.
You know what? Let me tell you that I only taught literature from Northeast India. And when we talk about literature from Northeast India, we're including all the other tribal literatures. And we also have Assamese literature. I only started teaching it just before COVID. And that was in about 2018-19, till the time I retired. But what I found was that when I convened my first refresher course, I had a special slot for writings from Northeast India. Now, I didn't specifically have tribal literature in mind, because in those days, tribal literature was something that was out of the question. Nobody could think about it. So I had the slot. And what I found very fascinating was that when I started speaking about the evolution of the literature of the Northeast, emphasizing especially upon tribal literatures, there was so much receptivity, and I think it was that refresher course that brought about these discussions on tribal literature in Northeastern Hill University. But in my in the few years that I taught, that I spoke about tribal literature, I think everybody has been fascinated by the stories, because in everyone's life, be it tribal or non-tribal, stories form a very important connection.
Okay, thank you so much, ma'am. Like here, in this particular region, we have something called this. There's this particular portion in our syllabus known as Himalayan literature, ma'am. So,
Yes, yes.
Himalayan literature, and basically here in our region, like we basically study and read regional literature as well as
Yes, yes.
Northeastern literature, like Tamsila
Yes.
and all of these literatures. And then here what we feel is like students really connect to our stories. And then like as you said, like like when we tell our own stories, like people, there is this kind of centralization of the margins, like we have kept our literature, we have kept our stories to ourselves, and then we
Yes.
yes, and then you people like you coming up and telling your stories have encouraged people like students and even us to actually tell our own stories, tell our own narratives, because there are so many people who have set narratives about us. ma'am. So, what do you have to say about the narrative set about the northeastern cultures and northeastern stories by the mainstream, people or the center, let's say, ma'am?
Uh, are you saying that what does the center think of us?
Ma'am, yes, ma'am.
Well, you know what? I think I'll not be able to tell you what exactly the center thinks of us, but I think in many ways we've been exoticized. And this is something you see in Mamang Dai's book, Lucky, Stupid Cupid. You know, she talks about it. If you read a book, she's a very good writer, but I don't think I'd be in a position to tell you what the rest of India thinks of us. But let me give you one example. You know, Easterine Kire's book, for instance, When the River Sleeps. And when a lot of people were interviewed, I found it very, I was appalled. I wouldn't say anything, but I was completely appalled that when this particular reader was interviewed, she said that she found that it read like a fairy tale. Now, the element of the fairy tale is always attributed to our stories, especially when you read some of the stories that come from this side. Now, I have a book called Speaks it's called Memoir in Water, Speaks the Wham Crab. It's a book of short fiction, and I actually made the river speak. The river talks about her woes. The river talks about how dirty she's become. The river talks about the kind of tribulation that the people who live around her experience. And, when you look at many of these stories, again, I come back to Eastern Kire. I think now people have begun to understand, and they give us this special category that says that literature from Northeast India, tribal literature, has a certain aura of the magically real. There is magic realism in it. Maybe this is something that I would connect to, because when I look at Gabriel Garcia Marquez and understand that this is what has been attributed to him, I find it very touching that Marquez talks about how his grandmother used to tell stories. She would begin from the beginning and suddenly end somewhere, and suddenly leave him with questions. And so when you read his books, you have the sense of beginning somewhere and not ending, and yet continuing to tell the story. Now, this is something I think we find in our literature from Northeast India, from a lot of the hill communities. And I think it's up to all of you, it's up to all of us to actually stand up and say, this is in our blood, this is in our veins. You may call it literature, but this is our voice. This is what we say is our story, our stories. So we claim these stories and we stand up and say, okay, if you want to call it literature, and since we are from the oral communities, we will write it down in the alphabet that was given to us. All right, we'll write it down. But first and foremost, we have to understand that this is the oral law that has shaped us and that has formed us.
All right. Ma'am, and then while teaching as well as researching travel literature, ma'am, did you face any kind of challenges? And if you faced any, like, how did you address them?
Yes, the challenge came before I began writing. The challenge came when I entered when I entered the arena, the teaching field, and I realized that we were talking about Wordsworth's daffodils, and this was something. Since I'm from literature, I think many of you from literature will understand that we're talking about Wordsworth's daffodils. And honestly, when I was a youngster, I couldn't picture daffodils because I was playing amidst bamboos. And I remember having this conversation with Professor Temsulao. She was my a very close friend, and her room was across mine. And I kept asking. I said, why do we have to study the daffodils when we can do so much study about the bamboos? And this is our reality. This is what I think is important. Now, at this point, maybe if I could have Anugar to share screen with my first poem. It's called The Tale of the Lost Script. Now, this is a poem. This is the first poem that I wrote. It's not the first poem, but it's the first poem in my first collection. And it talks about the tale of the lost script. Now, if you come to Northeast India, you find that amongst the Khasis, amongst the Mizos, amongst the Garos, amongst the Bodos, there's this story about how we lost the script, which is the reason why we write what we use the Roman alphabet to write the script. And amongst the Khasis, there was this messenger that was sent to receive the script from God. But the messenger was so foolish, he put the script into his mouth, whereas the plainsman who was with him put it on his ponytail. So when you talk about the ponytail, you probably think of, a pujari or a Brahmin. He tied it on his ponytail, and when the flood came, the Kasi man swallowed the script, and this plainsman came through. But what is interesting is that in swallowing the script, he was able to internalize the script. And so the oral became very important for the Kasi. For the other Northeastern communities, they have different stories. I'll just read it. Now, this is the voice of the messenger. I awoke to a raging controversy that pushed me even deeper into shame. Lifeless as the debris that was spewed out by the torrents, this is the flood, the script swimming in my entrails. And then it became a flailing absurdity within the bowels of the ancestor, whom all solicited, whose name felicitated, whom all believed to be a natural winner. He came back, having obtained nothing, only his own safety. Can you scroll down, please? Okay. When another was crafted by mortal cunning, this is the written scripts that we have now, the winds invoked the memories that stung with the ignominy of the loss of the ciphered medium of the word that had been handed to him. Now, the him here is the person from the plains who had been handpicked for the assignment and sent to be messenger to his people. And then we hear the voice of the Kasi messenger. I was eventually trashed off with the ash from their cold hearts, demolished and scattered on the Leusbo. Leusbo is the rubbish dump in their yards. And then there had been another sole representative of his tribe, harbinger too of their new beginnings, the architect of their collective gain, cowed by the elements, riddled with doubt, but successful against the odds that dogged his journey back. This is the messenger from the plains. The scroll he preserved with a strategy unrevealed to the ancestor who merely brimmed over with the misplaced confidence of those said to be line-marked by the gods. So here is a description of our messenger, the Kasi messenger, because if you're meant to be line-marked by the gods, it means that you are the chosen of the gods. But where was this? Nothing came out of it because he lost the script. And in the fourth section, yet, says the messenger, I cleave to them to fuel their lives with my insolvent breath, to redress that moment with the telling that will resist being trapped in the flat weave of a later make. For the legend must be, though vanquished, must say. And here is, I begin my volume with the oral, how important the oral is. How important it is that the messenger is still speaking to us. Amongst the Kasis, the messenger is looked upon as some kind of a fool, and, the element of humor is very important, I think, amongst all the tribes, amongst all communities. And so when you talk about the messenger, normally we make fun of him, but ultimately we find that the messenger, in order to redress what he's done, what is he doing? He swallows a script, internalizes it, and as a matter of fact, as a matter of consequence, we too have to do what he does, and that is to speak about it, to keep telling our stories.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for reading your poem. There is this question, like, how do you balance the oral traditions of your native Khasi culture with the written form of English in your writing?
You know what? When I first started writing, I made a conscious decision that I had to write in English. I don't know if I should regret that, but I've done it. And it's too late for me to regret it, though I do write in Khasi, and I'm very proficient in Khasi. I can speak. The reason why I wrote in English was that I wanted my community to be heard beyond the boundaries, beyond the physical boundaries of my own land. And which is why when you read my first collection, I use a lot of Khasi words which still remain intranslatable to the English, and and I've been able to balance it. I've been able to do it. And when I write my poems nowadays, I find that I still write in English. But when I write my plays, I write them in Khasi. I can't explain why that is.
Thank you, ma'am. Like, since you've written in English, it's accessible to us all as well.
Yes,
We
yes, yes,
can
that's true.
read them and understand them, ma'am. I mean, ma'am, the other question that I like to ask is, in the oral discourse in Khasi folk narrative, you explore the significance of oral traditions in Khasi culture. How do you think these traditions contribute to the richness and diversity of Indian literature?
Um, it's because, how do I answer that? Because, when you have to go back to the history of Indian English literature. If you look at Sahitya Academy, when it first brought out its history of Indian literature, if you can still buy it, it's still there. There's no mention made of literature from Northeast India. If you look at many of the anthologies, you find that no writers have been mentioned. It was only sometime in the 1990s, in the 2000s, that you have poets, being included. Poets like Robin Singh Ngangom, poets like Kinpam Singh Nonkanri, but very few women poets have actually been included. Um, but I think what is being understood now is that when we look at India, because since we come from a country that has been very secular, I think tribal literature stands on its own, contributing to the very stuff that can be called Indian writing in English.
Ma'am, it is such a comfort that we have our own standing. We have our tribal literatures, and here also, very recently, an author from our region received Madan Puraskar, a very prestigious award from Nepal. So, I mean, it is such an honor and a comfort for us that
Yes,
we have
that's
our
true.
literature now being represented, and in the world stage. I mean, because of world literature, comparative literature, and translation studies, everyone is able to read our literatures and
Yes,
understand, and
yes,
this is
that's
a
true.
comforting thing, ma'am. And then, you writing in English is like such an addition to that, because it's like, like for translation is there, yes, but an author writing in English and the readers reading it in English
Yes, that's true.
and understanding. So, ma'am, it's such a comforting thing for each and every one of us. Now, ma'am, I'd like to ask another question regarding translation. Ma'am, like, while you translate Khasi literatures into English, ma'am, like, is there, like you said, there are certain texts that you cannot, terms that cannot be translated into English. So, has it been a challenge for you, like, to
Well,
translate?
it's yes, for instance, let me use the word renew. That's a word in Khasi. I don't know if you've ever read, there's a book by Ropsang Lampa. I remember reading his books when I was when I was still in school. And there was a particular book called The Third Eye. I was fascinated by it. He talks about a certain aura around the third eye. So when I was writing, now for me, I grew up with this idea of the renew as something which is part of my bloodstream. We talk about the renew. Now, when your renew is in place, it means that, you know, um, when your renew is in place, it means that I've called it a numinous extension of personality. Let's see if I have it around here. Um, yes, I have this description of the renew, um, which is actually very difficult to translate into English. I call it the renew is a numinous extension of personality, a lighted area that encircles an individual and spells out personality in several complex layers, nourished by an inherent genius, which is also the racial intelligence. It is an unself conscious recognition of one's multiple strengths. This in itself produces positive waves that communicate themselves to others in multifarious and intangible ways. The renew speaks of an inner force that is difficult to conceal. In maturity, it is almost tangible and is a natural protection against all negative influences. Even a child may possess a strong ringeo or be a ringeo, and therefore prove to be able to withstand the suppressive forces that may threaten him or her. And the next point is very interesting. Giving a child a name is the first step towards empowering its ringeo. Now, when I was writing, I found a lot of concepts, a lot of ideas, a lot of words that remained untranslatable, and therefore I've used these words. Uh, I haven't um, I haven't tried to substitute them, but I've always given an explanation. And this whole idea of the renewal brings back to me, as I said, Dr. Lopsang Rampa, the idea of the aura, the idea of the third eye. And, it's interesting to see that as we read tribal literatures, we find that there are so many intersections at all levels with different communities. And I don't think it's possible for any community to be able to actually get an equivalent of it only from the English language. There may be equivalents in other languages, but definitely not only from the English language. And so we have to proceed to clarify more by the kind of explanations that we give at the end of whatever we're writing. I hope I've answered your question.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much. And ma'am, in the lecture community, we have this particular story about the river Tisata. So here, I mean, like in your culture also, we have the story of the race of the rivers. So ma'am,
Yes.
for the audience and for us, like, will you kindly elaborate a little on the story, like your story of the rivers, the race of the rivers?
Well, this is the story of two sisters. Once again, I think you know that we come from a matrilineal society. I think you know that. And we trace our lineage from the mother. And there are many of these stories. Well, it's not that there are stories that only we have about women. We also have stories about men, but this is a story of two rivers, um, Yam and Ngot. And the two rivers are the two sisters are playing they were playing together, and suddenly they decided to go for a race. And the river Umngot said, I'm going to race ahead. And the river Umyam took its own sweet time. She took her own sweet time. She went through, she explored the countryside around, and she lost the race, of course. But it didn't matter for her that she lost the race, but she was actually able to go through so much and see so much that she was able to explore the region around her. So it's basically a story of these two rivers, two sisters who race each other, but they finally meet on the plains of Bangla. I'm not using the word Bangladesh because that's something that we talk about only in the 1970s. But for the Khasis, Bangladesh existed in their racial memory simply as Bangla. So the plains of Bangla, you can actually see where these two rivers meet. Umyam and Umngot. And rivers have important stories, which is why I have this story about Kawa Umkra. Wa means river, Umkra. And, I make a talk, and some of these stories are based on real experiences. And when you read Wa Umkra, you find that, the element of the element of magic realism is very strong, because when you read tribal literature, there are no borders between the physical and the extra physical. There are no borders and no boundaries. And you find that, again, I go back to Easterine Kire's book, When the River Sleeps. You have the main protagonist calling the jungle his wife. When you ask him, he says, the jungle is my wife. Now, immediately when you say that, you find that many people from the tribal communities understand what he means by that. Because the jungle is so much a part and parcel of his life. And as I've spoken about it in one of my essays, in one of my articles, it's like all of us are living in a speaking universe. And it is this speaking universe that we have to constantly revive. We don't want it to become dumb. We want it to continue to speak and to breathe into us, to breathe life into us.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for explaining it so well. And as a student of literature and as interested in literature, I'd like to ask for a reading list. Would you recommend some books from the northeastern states, like which we should absolutely read? Like,
It's actually a very long list, but then I can only think of some books. Now, you should read Professor Temsulao's book called uh, On Being Naga. And in one of the books that she has now, this is a very random listing, okay, as it's coming to me. In one of the essays, she in one of the articles has an essay. I mean, the book has an essay entitled "On Headhunting." Now, that's something that I think everybody has to read, because we have to look at it. We have to look at it in relation to how headhunting has been viewed by the so-called cultured communities. She uses humor to sort of read what is meant by headhunting. Now, another book that you have to read is Mamang Dai's book, The Black Hill. She did a lot of research to explain the, she gives us a history of Arunachal Pradesh, and the colonial history of Northeast India is very important for all of us to read. We can look at the histories that were written by the collectors, from all regions. From all regions, and you get to know what your history is all about. And then, of course, Preeti Gill's book, The Peripheral Center, has a collection of very interesting essays. But there's another book edited by Geeti Sen. It's called Where the Sun Rises When the Shadows Fall. That has a very interesting collection of essays. And then of course, there are books by Easterine Kire. Of course, if you want to learn about Khasi society, you can look in my book, The Oral Discourse in Khasi Folk Narrative. And of course, I think more than anything else, we have to read the outpouring of poetry and fiction that's coming from this region. Because the history is, I find that when I read these books, it's very interesting that every every woman writer that I read, looks upon herself as a kind of a historian, and the books could be termed as being, a historiography of sorts, a rewriting of history. So, in order to understand the region better, I think you have to sort of absorb the poetry and the fiction that's being read. It's like listening to your elders talk to you. It's like what we have in Khasi society, sitting around the hearth and listening to stories. Now we don't have a hearth because of global warming, but we sometimes we still sit around, which is very rarely nowadays. But sharing of stories, it's when you absorb all this that you realize, okay, we all have we have very important connections, and we intersect at very important points. And one of these are the migration stories that you find in these communities.
And ma'am, like since the youngsters, they're moving away from these small towns to the cities for education, for work, because that is there a kind of gap in transfer of like oral literatures and oral stories? Do you believe that?
Yes, there is a gap, and the gap lies when the older generation refuses to talk, when the older generation gives in, surrenders to this notion of the new media actually dominating our lives. Now, I'm having this constant conversation with my daughter. You had her recently, Lapadyang SYIEM. She's my daughter. I think you had her at your forum. Now I'm having this constant talk with Lapadyang about over a son, and both of us are trying to keep him away from the what do you call it, from the mobile, because he's not going to learn anything from the mobile. So what is important is that we tell stories. Mothers should be telling stories. Fathers do tell stories. My father told me a lot of stories, but I got my stories from my grandmother, my mother, and my great grandmother through my mother. So what is important is that we keep telling them. You can't blame the younger generation, the younger people, when there's absolutely taken up by the new media. You can't blame them. This is part and parcel of our lives. But we have to set up an alternative lifestyle, which was never alternative for us, but which will be alternative for them, and they will come back to it. And very interesting, Mamang Dai talks about it in one of her essays, when she says that when we're children, we don't understand the importance of these stories. It's only when we grow up and we're away from it that we realize, okay, where do I fall back? What do I fall back to? I have to fall back to these stories. And then we come back to them. So, we have to keep talking.
Ma'am, I like the structure of nuclear family system. Like, is it to blame because like the like we are moving far away from our grandmothers and our grandparents, like could actually tell stories. And then nowadays, as you said, because of mobile phones and because of so many other gadgets and all, like children do not listen to the stories and told by their grandparents, like which we got the opportunity growing up. So is the nuclear family system and all of these to blame, ma'am?
It's not only the nuclear system, it's not this, it's not that, it's the whole, it's the whole age that we're living in. But very interesting, I'd like to mention that um, I'm talking about young people. There are three young people that I would like to mention at this point. One of them, though I hate to say it, is my daughter, SYIEM, who's a performer. The second person is a painter, is a visual artist. Her name is Karine Joplin Langste. And the third person is Diarisa Rumnong. Now, all of these came from very urban surroundings. They came from cityscapes. But what they've done is they've managed to sort of incorporate their own tribalness, and they're using the new media, they're using the digital media to actually communicate to others, to actually talk about who they are. Now, Diarisa Rumnong has a web page called Speak Your Roots, and it's almost very oral in the way it functions, because she puts up certain words, she puts up certain concepts in Kasi, and she asks her readers to come back to her, to come back and to write, to give that kind of, so there's a kind of interchange between Speak Your Roots and the readers. And then Karen Joplin Langste, I always talk about this. This is an anecdote that I always share with everyone. She's a visual artist. She was sent to the United States. She was sent to Austin, and to stay with her aunt, because I think they thought that she would never be able to have a job, or, well, I don't know why it was she was sent there. She lived there for 3 months, and she said she was totally uninspired. The only thing that she could draw, she could paint in those 3 months, was her aunt's dog. And then she was sent back. The moment she came back here, amidst the surroundings, what did she do? She began to do her painting, and it was a very creative period when she came back. So now she's uploaded these paintings. Um, she's uploaded these paintings, and when you look at some of these paintings, they tell their oral story. They tell this story, and they call out to us. And of course, Lapriang does her performances online and talks about the stories that matter to our communities. So there's a way in which we can actually come back to our roots. And important to understand that grassroots understanding is very important. Grassroots knowledge, grassroots intelligence, grassroots perception is important. And in many ways, I think we need the help of the older generation to help the younger people understand this, discover this within themselves. It's an uphill climb, but we can all climb it. Your audio is off. Your audio is off.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you for showing us the way how to go about it, to navigate through this particular global world and globalization and everything, to actually go back to our roots. Thank you so much, ma'am. And we would like to go on having conversations like this, and we'd like to continue even today, but because of time constraints, we have to again
That's
cut
fine.
short. But ma'am, we'd love to hear some of your poems, if you can read them out.
I think I've sent some. Maybe I would like to read to the rest of India from another Indian. Well, should I read When the Bamboo Talked? This talks about, it's a short poem. This talks about what we call our tribal realities. This happened when my mother passed away. And on the day she died, the minute that she died, the bamboo just came crashing down in the farm, in the farm, which is about 25 kilometers away from here. I'll just read it quickly and then I go on to the next poem. When the bamboo talked. On the day she died, it was like never before, windless and still. I still remember that day. Several hours after she left us, in the interlude of calm following grief, as we prepared for the vigil before the ordained rite of the return, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, in unfamiliar soil, the wind died too at midday in distant Bhoi. Bhoi is the place where the farm is. August green with paddy, where she'd walked the fields, talked to her crops, sovereign over her soil, as if to make way for the sudden crack of a single bamboo that sliced the stillness and slammed down almost onto Bahe, Petos, and Bana Makri. These are the workers there, to stun them midway in their labors, bonded to her as thickly as the ancient clayey stratum their uncles and fathers, since generations before, had turned over and plowed, to speak to them what they did not know that they already knew, even before we got to them with the news. This happened on the 10th of August. And when we told them that my mother had passed away, they said, we know, because the bamboo had spoken to them. So the next poem, maybe if there's still time, is called To the Rest of India from Another Indian. We have no Ram, no Sita, no Arjuna. Ours are differently named. No wars were fought on grounds in Kurukshetra and Lanka. Ours were in camouflage, up the stony tracks of the antelope, down impossible ravines, and through impassable jungles. We've no temples, none to be purified with litanies and incense to leaven crimes of the night. No one river too sacred to purify impurities. None of our gods bear god names like yours. And this is the call to other communities. But if you should twist your tongues around ours, as we learn to twist ours around yours, you'll get a taste of webbed legends. Earth gods and sky deities, nymphs and elven dwarves that winnow souls and scale bamboo leaves, rinsed intestines in running streams, icons that died for a love that endorsed a freedom uninhibited as our wild mountain herbs, Lom Shillong and Sajer Nangli, and how we swallowed our written script, stones that eat and rivers that fly, talking tigers and tiger men, an itching monster itching to be scratched, a rebellious stag pounding for freedom, and the inconsolable dirge of a mother. Is Nam still alive? And the tiger and the toad are our sibling mountain gods still at war with each other? And our translucent caves, let me tell you, that rig our underground worlds, stitch in the ancestor who sanctified the speaking tongue. Would you then even care to enter tongue-twistingly into the spoils of our speaking wealth? So, should I read some more?
Yes,
Or
ma'am.
is
Yes,
that
ma'am. Please, please do. We
oh,
love to.
okay?
Yes,
I think I'll read the last two.
sure.
Okay. No, no, no. Just go up a bit, please. Yeah, yeah. Just go down a bit. It's called the oral. Yeah, this is the aura of the oral. I use the word oral, aura. And here I talk about the oral and how there is this constant tug of war between the written and the oral. And the first part is called the written ascendant, how the written has actually come up very strongly. It's going up. Now, when the light of civilization finally reached these hills, those in authority issued leaflets that endorsed the daguerreotype of the Khasi heathen, posing cheerily outside his hut, who had nothing to offer, it seemed, except what he didn't have. That daguerreotype circulated to expedite the superfluity of the native ideal of the spoken knowledge of things through a lens that magnified the full range of his naked ignorance. So you can understand uh, the colonial interests here. So his native adroitness at the oral telling of the tale, the sanctified tale, tales of his people's own kind, tales that can never be bought or sold, tales to be told of the here and now, of what's been and what will be, inbuilt in him like the quai is the betel nut, like the quai that he chewed with discursive efficiency would be divested for him. Granted, for better, or you might even say for worse, he was stripped and turned inside out. But the wonder was that he couldn't be picked completely clean of a nativism that refused to subscribe to the sorceries of the written rule. And then the next part two, it's called the aura of the oral. It's not the written ascendant, sorry, I made a mistake here. It's called the oral resistant. Okay, the oral resistant and how resistant the oral is. Thus, by a quirk of history and a twist of fate, A decision was enforced by the powers that ruled. The written officiously replaced the spoken in our tribal zones, declaring undeclared war on chantings and tongues, chronicles of words that call up the earth, invoke the sun and the stars, temper the elements to calm the seasons by the garnish of energies that course the uninscribed route that can never be pinned down to plottings and blottings on paper and taken so easily for granted. As Crownam once said, he's one of my, informants. As Crownam once said, like the arrow once released, it flies to the four corners, irreducible as the wind, unsettled as our rivers, ambidextrous as our gods, unreconciled as our legends, to an era that can never replace ever the epic of the spoken with a script as absurdly ad hoc as the writing and tearing up and writing and tearing up that tries to whittle down the aura that speaks and stays written constructions. That aura remaining wedged in corners hidden of the soul's inscape, shaping tongue twisting layers and labyrinths of freedom in spaces undeclared that can't be written off, can't be written over. That aura declaring war on the written alphabet even now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It
Thank
was
you.
wonderful having you on Travel Design Forum. And I
Thank
hope
you.
that we will be able to, have you like in other classrooms as well. And yes, ma'am. And ma'am, thank you so much for encouraging us. I'm sure the audience today are encouraged to tell our own stories and our own narratives, and then refuting the narrative set for us by somebody else, by the outsider. So thank you
That's
so
right.
much, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank
So
you.
much.
Thank you.
Now, moving forward, I have some information to share. Tomorrow, the 27th of August, we will have Ashish John Mundu and Pawan Kunjur coming to share their insights and experiences. We hope to see you same place, same time. Along with this, we have an exciting ongoing photography contest, an upcoming annual TDF bootcamp from October 4th to October 7th at Kerala 2025. And the TDF membership forms are also available at our website. So you can fill them up. Feel free to reach us via email or Instagram for more information. Thank you once again. With this, we end our session for today.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.